I'm Charlotte Yodar. I'm 34. It was Christmas dinner when my mother raised her glass, announced that my sister had just bought her dream house, then turned to me with that soft, practiced smile and said the room was still waiting on me to figure my life out. My sister smirked over her wine and asked when I was finally going to settle down. What none of them knew was that I'd already built an entire life they'd never once bothered to visit, and that the plain craft envelope in my coat pocket held the one number my mother had spent 12 years hoping no one would ever say out loud. My mornings start at 4:30, in a kitchen that smells like yeast and cold air. I own Hollow Creek Bakery and Farm, a stone building at the end of a gravel road with 30 acres behind it. My husband Daniel was in the barn fixing a shelf bracket. We had 11 wholesale orders to fill. None of it was glamorous. All of it was mine, down to the last board, and my family thought I still sold muffins at a card table on weekends. I let them think it. Somewhere along the way, I'd learned to stop explaining myself to people who'd already decided who I was. It saved my breath. It also, I'd later realize, cost me something I didn't see coming. My mother called that Tuesday, bright as a bell. "Your sister has big news," she said. "It wouldn't feel complete without you." I already knew what big news meant, a stage, and me as furniture on it. Daniel handed me a coffee and said I didn't have to go. "If I don't, she tells the room I couldn't be bothered," I said. "If I do, she tells the room I'm a mess. There's no version where I win." He just said, "Then don't hand them a knife." I went anyway, telling myself it'd be the same as always. I had no idea the script was about to break in my hands. That dinner didn't come from nowhere. I was always the dreamer. My mother's word for a disappointment with better manners. When I was 20 and said I wanted to open a bakery, she laughed the way you laugh at a child who wants to be a mermaid. Megan did everything in the order my mother had drawn up. State college, a husband with a title, a wedding in a rented hall with 300 guests, and a cake that cost more than my first 3 months' rent. Money in our family only ever flowed one direction. At 23, I sat at my mother's table with a real business plan, projected costs, a repayment schedule I'd checked 3 times, and asked her to co-sign a loan. She read every page. Then she slid it back and said, "We can only afford to believe in one of you." That was the whole answer. I took a microloan instead, cleaned offices at night to cover the payments, and never asked her for anything again. The only person who never made me feel like a bad investment was my father's mother, Ruth. She drove out the first week I ran my stand, bought the first loaf I ever sold, overpaid me on purpose, and told me, "Build it quiet, honey. Loud people need an audience. Builders just need mornings." She died 4 years ago. My mother cried loudest at the funeral and stood closest to the front, and I remember thinking Ruth would have found that about right. 12 years is a long time, and most of it was boring, which is the part nobody films. I signed a lease alone at 23 on a storefront. With a bad roof, I patched myself. I bought the farmhouse and acreage at 28 from a couple retiring to Arizona at a price that only made sense because the place was falling down. I grew an orchard from bare root saplings. I built wholesale contracts, one grocer at a time. The previous spring, I sat at my kitchen table and mailed the check that paid off the last loan on the property. No party, no post. My family never saw any of it, because I'd never once invited them to look. Daniel came into my life reframing a sagging barn roof 4 years ago. We married in my backyard under the oldest apple tree, 9 people there, a pie instead of a cake. I didn't invite my family, not out of spite, just because I'd stopped inviting people to laugh. They found out months later through a cousin. My mother said she was hurt not to be included. She'd never asked to be. Then, the week before Christmas, Megan called, which she never does, and asked, breezy and careful, how the little bakery was doing, whether I cleared a decent bit around the holidays. My family had never once asked a curious question about my business. Now someone was checking the couch cushions for change. My mother called too, unprompted, sweet in a way that set my teeth on edge. "You always were so good with your hands. Bring some of your baking, whole family under one roof." In 34 years, she'd never complimented me without a but attached. Praise from my mother wasn't affection, it was a down payment. 2 days before Christmas, my father drove out to the bakery, something he'd done exactly never. He set a plain craft envelope on the counter and said, "You should know what you're walking into. I'm tired of watching it, Charlotte." Then he left before I could ask anything else. I opened it after closing, alone, under one light, a home equity line drawn against my parents' paid-off house, a co-signer agreement, my mother's signature beside Megan's, on a mortgage for a 5-bedroom dream house. A bank statement showing a retirement account drained the same week, the withdrawals circled in my father's pencil, both feeding the down payment on Megan's house. The same spring I mailed the final check on a farm I'd built with no one's help. My mother's voice came back across 11 years, clear as the day she said it. "We can only afford to believe in one of you." It had never been true. She'd had plenty. She'd just already decided who got it. I didn't sleep, not from anger, from arguing with myself over whether to say anything at all. I could keep quiet forever, and nothing in my life would change. But for 12 years, my silence had let the story keep running, had let her keep selling the version where I was the risk and Megan was the sure thing. Daniel found me at dawn, with cold coffee and the envelope still on the table. "You don't owe them a scene," he said, "but you don't owe them your silence either." I decided I wouldn't start anything, but if they pushed me onto that stage one more time, I wasn't swallowing it. Christmas morning I baked apple and bourbon pecan, because the ordinary work steadied my hands. I dressed like a woman who owned her own building, which mostly looks like a nice sweater. "I'm not going over there to win," I told Daniel. "I'm going over there to stop losing." My parents' house looked the way it always does at Christmas, every surface insisting we are doing wonderfully. Photos of the dream house went hand to hand. My mother took my pies, steered me in by the elbow, and announced, "Charlotte's here, still figuring things out, but she brought us her little pies. Isn't that sweet?" 2 years married, 30 acres paid off, and I was introduced as a hobby in progress. Megan cornered me in the kitchen before dinner, mask gone. Trevor's bonus hadn't come through, the mortgage was a lot, and Mom mentioned "You've done pretty well out there. Could I help, invest? Family helps family." The number she named would have covered my first storefront twice over. "I'll think about it," I said, the exact phrase my mother always used right before her no. My mother followed a minute later to close the sale, arranging potatoes that didn't need arranging. It would mean a lot. It's the least you could do. She has real responsibilities now. You've only got yourself. Same accounting as 11 years ago, new coat. Family takes care of family, she said. "Yes," I told her quietly. "I've noticed how that works in this family." On the back porch, away from the crowd, I told them plainly, "I'm not lending the money." Megan looked stricken. My mother's warmth vanished and she leaned in. "Don't you dare make a scene at the table tonight." And there was the tell. She wasn't afraid of my no. She was afraid of what I might say if I stopped being quiet. We sat down to eat. I kept my coat draped behind my chair, the envelope inside it, and waited. My mother tapped her glass and rose to make her toast. So blessed, wonderful news. Megan and Trevor bought their dream house. The table erupted on cue. Then, because one triumph is never enough for her, she turned to me, warm and pitying. And of course, we're all still waiting on our Charlotte to figure out her life. Megan, flushed with wine, leaned in with the punchline. "So when are you finally going to settle down?" I set my glass down without a sound. "I already did," I said. "I just didn't invite people who never believed in me." I told them, plainly, without raising my voice, "This is my husband Daniel, married 2 years, under the apple tree behind my farmhouse. My farmhouse, 30 acres, paid off last spring, the bakery building owned outright, 6 employees, contracts with 2 grocery chains. I've been married 2 years and running a business for 12, and tonight this family introduced me as someone still figuring things out." The silence that fell was the specific kind that comes when a story everyone believed turns out to be wrong. My mother recovered by catching fire. "How dare you turn your sister's night into a performance about yourself, after everything we've done for you?" I let her finish. Then I said, "Let's talk about that." I set the envelope on the table, unopened, and laid it all out. The equity line against the house I grew up in, the retirement account drained the same week, the co-signature on Megan's mortgage, the down payment that came out of my parents' future the very spring I quietly finished paying for my own. "You always had the money," I said. "You just spent it on the daughter you'd already decided to believe in." I didn't gloat. I told them I wasn't collecting a debt. Nobody owed me money. I was done paying in silence, because silence was the only thing I'd ever actually given them. I told Megan I wouldn't fund the house, but if she wanted real help, I'd sit down and look at the actual numbers honestly, without our mother in the room. I told my mother I hadn't come to hurt her. I'd come to stop being the story she told to make everyone else feel chosen. Then I stood, told the room the pies were on the sideboard, apples from my own trees, help yourselves, and at the door I turned back and said, "Merry Christmas, I mean that." Then Daniel and I walked out into the cold. The days after were quieter than I expected. Aunt Carol called to apologize for hearing only one side of me for years. Cousins drove out and lingered at the bakery, quietly rewriting what they'd been told. Megan and Trevor put the dream house back on the market before spring. The numbers had never worked, and no amount of my mother's retirement was going to fix that. I felt no joy in it, just gravity doing what gravity does to something built on a bluff. My own life didn't change at all, which was the point. The oven still needed lighting at 4:30. The only difference was, I no longer carried their story in my chest like a stone. My father came out in January, turned his hat in his hands, and finally said what he'd never managed in 34 years, that he'd watched it happen and told himself it wasn't his place, and that was cowardice. I told him I forgave him, but an apology opens a door, it doesn't move you back in. We start from here, slow. My mother sent long messages about how humiliated she was, how I'd fractured the family. I read them and stopped explaining myself. But this time the silence wasn't hiding anything. It was a boundary, and I finally knew the difference. If there's one thing I'd want you to take from this, it's that the people who never bet on you don't get to cash in on the life you built without them. I spent 12 years thinking my silence was strength, when really, it was just the quietest way to agree with people who were wrong about me. The day I stopped agreeing, I didn't get louder, I just finally got free.